All right. Well, it has been a full day of really great thought leaders and insights shared, but we are not done. We have a wonderful duo that's going to share with us how DePIN can restore trust in AI. And we're going to welcome our two ladies up for our fireside chat. We have Clara Tsao. Please welcome to the stage. Please give her a round of applause. Clara is the founding officer at Filecoin Foundation. Welcome to Proof of Talk. We also have Rachel Wolfson here today with us, joining us on stage. Rachel is a journalist at Cointelegraph. Please give these ladies a round of applause. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that the day is almost over, so we appreciate all of you still being here, and just give a big shout out to the Proof of Talk organizers. This has been a wonderful event, and I'm really excited that we get to be on stage here. So great. Before we get started with the questions, I want Clara to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her role at Filecoin Foundation.
Yeah, it's so good to meet everyone, and this has been such a jam-packed day. I've met so many great attendees and speakers throughout the afternoon. My name is Clara Tsao. I'm the founding officer of a project called Filecoin. We're the world's largest decentralized storage network. So if you imagine, instead of a centralized monopoly like an Amazon Web Service owning all your data, we have a more Airbnb-like model of independent data centers, around 3,000 of them all around the world, where you can choose where you store your data, and you can also set it up in a way that's customizable, in a way that allows you to have choice and not have your data locked up in monopolies. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today when we think about the future of data, which is going to be mainly AI generated.
Right, wonderful. Well, before getting started with the complicated questions, I want you to kind of explain what makes Filecoin a DePIN, a decentralized physical infrastructure.
Yeah, so DePIN is actually a word that has become really popular, especially in the blockchain space, the last 2 or 3 years. People have used the term DePIN summer. We've seen a lot of new startups come up building in the DePIN space. But what it really means is, how can you have physical infrastructure that isn't owned by a single entity, but by a network of players? So there's so many different kinds of DePIN projects. There's a company that stores data on Filecoin and the decentralized web called WeatherXM, where this entrepreneur wanted to decentralize weather stations. And if you imagine why weather can be so inaccurate, it's because a lot of times major monopolies only want to build weather stations in areas where they're going to make money. And this company actually piloted their weather stations during the Paris Olympics last year. So it's quite incredible when you think about localized weather, how you can take a network of physical devices and also incentivize people to put these weather stations in places where there may not be necessarily a traditional economic model to support that. And that's the same for all other kinds of DePIN projects. There's amazing projects like Helium, where instead of a major telecom provider owning all your telecommunication services, you can have decentralized hotspots all around the world. And the model is really simple. In crypto, the biggest thing that brought me to crypto in the first place is rethinking the economic model of how we own and are able to access basic services, where today a lot of services are just owned by monopolies, and a lot of physical services come up with that. And we are building a new future in the network of DePIN projects that allow people to have choice on decentralized compute, decentralized GPUs, for us, decentralized storage when it comes to actually storing the data, all the way to the hardware layers on top of that.
Wonderful. So what does AI have to do with DePIN, and how is Filecoin ensuring trust in AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you imagine by the end of 2026, there's some studies that show 90% of new content on the web will be completely AI generated. And that data has to be stored somewhere. Actually, just a few months ago, OpenAI came out with something called memory on ChatGPT. And memory is really how you can store your archival data that you search on ChatGPT. So we're starting to see a new generation of so much data that are not even generated by humans or search, but from AI to AI, agent to agent models. And we're building the rails to be able to store the data of the future. And we want to make sure that something as precious as your own memory and things that you might say to a chatbot or something that you're already using AI for doesn't necessarily become something that invades your personal privacy, something that you can really protect and determine how you want to secure. And we are already doing this with all kinds of data. Filecoin is the world's largest decentralized storage network. We have over 4 exabytes of available storage, and you can also store all kinds of data from large archival data sets. We've worked with museums like the Smithsonian to back up Alexander Graham Bell and artifacts from the past. We've worked with great institutions like MIT to back up all their open learning. Today, if you're using the web and you want to look at archival storage through an organization called Internet Archive in the Wayback Machine, every single day, a copy of that data is being backed up on Filecoin. And over the last 2 years, we've been also working on how to get fast retrievals and really build a layer of startups that are allowing for storing of all kinds of data. From the DePIN projects I've mentioned before, like WeatherXM, when they capture weather data from all around the world, they're storing it and incentivizing people to set up weather stations on top of Filecoin. And then you also have so many additional models like Storacha, which allows for you to store everything from NFTs, if you're in the Web3 space, to your basic pictures from your phone. So there's so many examples of this, but AI is really the next layer of data that we're gonna see tremendous growth in. And over the last year especially, we've been focused on making sure that we have the right integrations to be able to allow people with the freedom of choice to choose where they store, how they store, and how they access it.
So AI-generated data is now being stored on Filecoin, correct?
Correct.
So specifically, how is it that Filecoin is ensuring that trust? You know, you mentioned that ChatGPT and data being stored there, but I really want you to break down for everybody like how that trust is being ensured through Filecoin.
Yeah, so the way that files are stored on the decentralized web, specifically on Filecoin, is we have something called proof of space-time, where every time you store a piece of data, you have copies of it all around the world. It could be multiple data centers, ensuring that your data will never be lost. But we also prove whether the data actually has been altered or not. And when you think about the era of misinformation, disinformation, and deep fakes, the biggest question a lot of people will be asking about AI is not only how it's stored, but also the quality of data and whether the data source is something that has been tampered with. There's a lot of governments around the world today that are looking at AI ethics and AI regulation. And the biggest thing that a lot of people are scared of in trusting AI is really verifying and making sure that the data sets are accurate. So we are very much at the infrastructure level. When you think about the AI stack, there's AI agents, there's obviously the models, and then there's infrastructure, whether that's how you store your data, compute and GPUs. And we want to make sure that at the very bottom of that pyramid, everyone can verify and really securely trust the data that everyone is built off of and trained off of. When you think about day-to-day use cases, in SF, there are autonomous vehicles, Waymos, that are driving everywhere. Each one of those vehicles is creating around 1 terabyte of data a day. And if there's an accident that happens where maybe the car hits somebody, they have to store that data somewhere on how it's trained and verify what might have gone wrong. Unfortunately today, the cost of actually storing data can be so tremendous when you think about huge amounts of data. And AI data is actually more accurate the more data it's actually able to be trained on. So our economic model for how we do decentralized storage allows us to actually store large archival data sets at a fraction of the cost of AWS, but also have ability to prove that the data hasn't been altered. And this is especially important because a lot of people forget how fragile accessing your data might actually be. We've seen around the world, whether it's in government transitions, data just disappears. And a lot of people forget that on the internet, it's not like a physical library where information is being maintained all the time. But there are so many institutions that don't actually store or back up their data in a way that allows people to trust that it hasn't been changed. If it's open and public data that's out there, people want to make sure that, I don't know, police brutality data is accurate, or maybe women's health data is accurate, so policymakers don't actually use the wrong source of information for important decisions all around the world. So that's why we think it's extremely important. For you, Rachel, as a journalist, one of the questions is also making sure you're using the right photographs when you're documenting an event. And we've actually deployed our technology also in the front lines of war. For example, in Ukraine, when the war broke out, a lot of journalists actually used our technology to be able to take images of what was happening on the ground and allow for those images to be one day admissible in international criminal court. Because sometimes those images, people can't always trust that they came from the right source. And a lot of AI models today make it so realistic that something can be fully accurate. But this is when the ability to verify data source and changes becomes so important.
So on that example, I'm just curious, were any of those images AI generated? And if so, how do you know?
Yeah, I mean, the way that Filecoin works is you can actually see every change over time to where data is stored, and ensuring that, for example, you want to make sure all that data that an AI model is built off of is coming from that right source. In other examples where we see a lot of creatives like artists, this is especially important because they want to make sure they get rewarded for their work, and no one can steal something that they've spent years or hours making. We have tons of great startups building on the Filecoin ecosystem like LilyPad that allows for artists to be able to be compensated every time someone takes artwork that come from their source and ends up manipulating it. So they get a fraction of the cost. But we are building a whole sub-economy of applications, around 200 companies building on top of Filecoin today for all kinds of use cases, and many of which are ones where they're experimenting with AI and making sure that at the end of the day, the creators on top of the internet can find the right way to monetize and prove that they actually own that work and that they were the ones generating it. And it's the same thing when it comes to journalism, when people want to make sure we can prove that a photograph taken during an event came from a particular device. And we can actually do that when you look at the storage layer.
Is Filecoin seeing more AI-generated data now that we're moving towards this world consumed by AI?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say we see it very much like everyday people as well. We just see tremendous growth in a lot of people having interest to store AI data. And like I said, it's not like we are changing our business model to do AI. AI is just the biggest growth we've seen in the last 2 years for where data and the future of data is going. And we want to make sure that also we have a place to store all the new data that's coming from, and we can find interesting ways to look at, for the example earlier I talked about, which was memory when you're using chatbots. How can we make sure we can give users an option for something that isn't owned by big tech? Because they already own so much of our identity and how we search. How do we make sure that users can have an off-ramp where they can choose to protect their data in the right way they want?
Right. So I'd like to know a little bit about the challenges that you encounter when it comes to providing trust in AI-generated data and these models, and how Filecoin Foundation is combating these challenges.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges when it comes to building a decentralized storage network. A lot of times, one of the biggest priorities for us this year is teaching all the startups building on our ecosystem how to do basic customer service, because we don't have a single point of central command. And we're very much like architects in our ecosystem, making sure that everyone marches in the right direction. But that's the beauty of thinking about something that is completely community run and community governed, is making sure that we have the right on-ramps for people to be able to upload all kinds of data, and they also understand how it works. It's no different from other kinds of crypto projects out there where everyday consumers, sometimes the usability isn't there. But that's also where I think crypto has the best opportunity when leveraging AI is today you can vibe code and build all these interfaces that make the crypto rails that sometimes are so complicated much easier to use. And so I would say like number one for us actually is helping our ecosystem find very quick product market fit in all the different areas they're going after when it comes to infrastructure and storage. And then second, making sure that they have the right usability and customer experience that everyone can experience and not even realize they're using the decentralized tech. It just feels like they're storing somewhere. There's a number of companies that are already doing this. For example, there's a startup building on Filecoin that allows you to back up all the photos on your phone and the history of that. It's just an application that you can download, but those are the experiences where everyday consumers may or may not know, but they want that additional privacy and they want that guarantee that, for example, if an AWS data center goes down, they can permanently access that data without failure.
So I'm wondering, because Filecoin has been around for a very long time. How long has it been around?
Yeah, the white paper for Filecoin was written by Juan Benet back in 2014, and we had our initial coin offering in 2017, where a number of investors invested in the project, and then our network actually launched in 2020. And so it's been quite a journey, but it's always been part of our plan. It took AWS over 13 years to even build out a centralized data storage network, and for us, doing it in a decentralized way is 10 times harder, if not 100 times harder. And we're really excited to be able to follow all the phases we've planned. In the early stages of the network, we really focus on growing the amount of entrepreneurs that are running and building their own data centers all around the world. So building the world's largest network of available storage is what we did in the first year or two. And then the last 2 years, we've been really focused on evolving the types of companies and startups building on our ecosystem, investing in them and making sure they have the resources they need to be the best entrepreneurs and succeed.
Was AI-generated data something that Filecoin planned for early on, or was this kind of like a new development?
I think we've always planned on storing all kinds of data, but I think a lot of the biggest challenges with AI today are a really good fit for how Filecoin proves how data is stored. A lot of people today want that guarantee that they can prove the source of data and they can access it. And I think the other thing that's beautiful about not only just storing data, but having a huge archive of data that you can maintain and keep at a fraction of the cost of centralized providers is a lot of people don't realize today's version of the web is not necessarily a neutral version of information, the way that you enter a library and you pick a book from a bookshelf. In fact, when you go online, when you do a Google search result, it's who pays the most in advertising dollars to get that first index information. When we've backed up huge archives of information like Internet Archive and daily scrapes of the web, we allow people to actually build models and find new information that never existed before. So one example of this is we're working with a great nonprofit in Washington, D.C. called Muckrock. They actually allow for you to pull documents through Freedom of Information Act, FOIA requests, and we built a CIA agent on top of the Muckrock archives. It's called a CIA agent because you can crawl through CIA archives and more easily extract insights. And this is really important because let's just say you're a journalist and you want to verify the source of data coming from existing documents. Now you have an AI layer that makes it much easier to crawl historic information in a faster way that has never been done before. So there's just so many new ways of thinking about data and storage that isn't just the AI-generated images that a lot of people are using it for. We also think that it's going to be especially important for people to, when we think about agent-to-agent communication, it's going to be especially important for thinking about what that storage layer looks like, because there's going to be so much autonomous action from agents alone where humans are not even in the loop, and we want to make sure we can have the opportunity to use decentralized storage at every step of the way.
So with this solution, decentralized storage and AI generated data, is crypto involved here at all?
Yeah, so the way that Filecoin comes in, you might ask the question, why is there a coin? Why is this important? It's called Filecoin because obviously we're storing files, but in order to incentivize people to upkeep data centers around the world, people use Filecoin as a currency to be able to retrieve their files and also to store their files. And this is very, very different from how you think about AWS, where you are just paying, one time to a centralized provider, but that fee could go up at any point in time. We have a whole ecosystem where originally the first protocol that came out of our project was called IPFS, the Interplanetary File System. And IPFS functions much more like couch surfing. If you've ever used couch surfing, you have a network of volunteers that all are hosting people around the world, but you don't necessarily have that guarantee that they're going to serve the file you need and give it back to you because it's a volunteer-based system. So IPFS still exists as a protocol, but we thought, look, if we want people to take decentralized storage seriously and allow for people to actually retrieve any file at any point in time, you get to pay for that guarantee. So this is why by allowing people to get compensated and for people to pay to retrieve, you have data centers all around the world run by our entrepreneurs that some of them are really enterprise-grade data centers where if users have very specific needs for how they store and their specific enterprise requirements, we have companies out there that can allow for that secure layer of storage. We also have the more mom-and-pop shops for people that might have funny cat pictures that they just want to have a huge archive of. So there's so many different options out there, but that is the really great part about having an innovation economy around how we build data centers today.
Wonderful. We are actually out of time, so before we actually end, is there anything that you want the audience to know? Just any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm around for questions after, but I would say I think infrastructure and storage is probably the most exciting layer of crypto today, along with all the other DePIN projects, because you have entrepreneurs that come from very traditional fields that are now using the incentive structure of what crypto can allow to be able to create new scales of economies that didn't exist before. Today, a lot of the amazing DePIN projects that are out there today would not exist if crypto rails were not there. So if you guys also have questions around starting a DePIN project, if you're working on one and need that storage layer, definitely come talk to me. Or if you have ideas or want a grant from us or work with us in some way, I will be around.
Great. And Clara will be on Web3 Deep Dive podcast soon. So if you guys want to know more, please like and subscribe to Web3 Deep Dive podcast, which is my podcast. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you again to Proof of Talk for having us. This venue is incredible. And it's just such an honor to be on stage here with Clara. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. That was one of the best use cases of decentralization and AI that I've heard shared today. And I want to thank all of you for attending the first day of Proof of Talk. I know there was a lot of newcomers this year, and the conference just continues to get better and better. And with that last conversation around data storage and AI generating, or 90% of content generated on the web, which will be done by generative AI, is a very, very big number and something for us to think about. And then again, as we continue to use AI more and more, where is this information being stored? And so to have Filecoin as a solution is incredible. And then to incentivize entrepreneurs through their blockchain is also a really impressive business model. So I want to thank you guys again. I'm Nova Lorraine, your host for today. You will see me tomorrow as well as we continue to dive deep at one of the most incredible conferences in Web3 and AI. Thank you again for joining us.